Good morning. My name is Bill Baker with Firestorm. We're pleased to have you with us today. Unfortunately, I'm afraid none of us won the lottery, but we do have the lottery of being able to be together today. This is part of the Crisis Coach webinar series presented by the Greater Rochester Chamber of Commerce and the Eastern Great Lakes Contingency Planners. Our presenter today on the subject of crisis or consequence management will be the president of Firestorm, Jim Satterfield. This is the first in the 2016 Crisis Coach webinar series, and we hope you're going to be able to join us for all of these. We also would like to have you become our friend on Facebook or follow us on Twitter. Firestorm Soul on Twitter, Firestorm Solutions on Facebook. There is a hashtag, and that hashtag is Crisis Coach. Firestorm transforms crisis into value and empowers you to manage risk and crises. Firestorm expertise is crisis management, critical decision support, crisis communication, crisis public relations, and consequence management. We remind you that this presentation is not complete without the accompanying oral comments and discussion, and the work product presented must be read and considered by advice from your organization's personal counsel. And this information should not be interpreted as legal advice or legal opinion. We're delighted to have this webinar series underwritten by the Greater Rochester Chamber of Commerce and the Association of Contingency Planners, Eastern Great Lakes. Today, we're discussing crisis or consequence management. You can watch past webinars by going to firestorm.com. You can watch the past ones, and you can register for future ones.
So, Bill, I'll jump in. The Eastern Great Lakes Association of Contingency Planners is very active in the Western New York area, and certainly is a great opportunity. If you're not a member of that and you're attending today's webinar, I would encourage you to seek out that group. It's a chance to meet with your peers and know what is going on in the market and establishing best practices. Dr. Michael Redmond was to be with us today as moderator, and her schedule would not allow. So I would encourage you to talk with them, and then obviously the chamber and the program that they're doing there in Rochester is extremely important and provides you additional opportunities. I look forward to seeing you all in a conference in the Rochester area. I anticipate we'll be there sometime this year and do a Crisis Coach workshop. So look for that, and we'll announce it coming up. We'll also talk about some other opportunities that are happening, and in fact, I'll mention that now. By the way, this is Jim Satterfield, president of Firestorm. Next month, there'll be a virtual exercise for active shooter. There's 2 sessions scheduled, one for businesses and one for schools. The business session is February the 8th, and the school session is February the 18th, 2 o'clock Eastern, both of those events. That's a great opportunity to put your crisis team around a table, do a tabletop exercise, and talk about the decisions that you have to make. I would want to alert you that that's going to be a 2-hour virtual exercise, so you would want to block your calendar appropriately to handle that. And again, there is no cost for that, so that meets most budget requirements fairly well. And Bill, thanks for reminding me that I didn't win the lottery last night for $1.6 billion. I was really looking forward to coming and doing the webinar today with everyone with $1.6 billion stashed somewhere in my pockets. But I think we'll all find a different way to move forward. There's certainly consequences that come from not winning at that point. So condolences to everybody who also joins with me in not winning. That's about 200 million of my close personal friends, I think, as we move through this. So when we think about crisis, it's a turning point in any situation or an event. It's an opportunity to see what's going to happen next, and all the future events will be determined around that. So the crisis can be very short. It could be minutes or seconds or days, but the consequences then will last for an extended period. And so one of the challenges that I want to try to put in front of us all today is to start to think about how we respond in these events, with the focus on what the consequences will be. Now, we really want to get started at the very beginning of this process, and we had done a survey last year of several hundred companies, and you'll find this one interesting. Do you currently use external intelligence to identify potential threats? Less than a third of the companies surveyed said yes. So they're relying on their ability to predict what's going to be happening now or shortly. And we're going to go into that area a lot more today, but I would encourage you that predictive intelligence, threat intelligence, is now a major driver, not only when we think about behaviors of concern and violence, but when we think about cyber exposures. There are new regulatory requirements associated with threat intelligence there, and it becomes an opportunity for you to know more about what's going to be happening next. So we're going to explore that some today and look into the significance. We also are in an environment today where everything is foreseeable, and tomorrow anyone may be found accountable. The what did you know and when did you know it types of questions come out regularly, and there's always going to be a focus on the fact that you could have known about that, but because you didn't have these elements in place, you allowed it to occur, and there's liability coming back. Court cases have ruled that owners of companies or locations have that responsibility to provide a safe environment. And in a terrorist attack in 1993, the courts ruled that the building owner was twice as liable as the terrorist who tried to blow it up. So when you think about that, it really tells us that we need to start focusing on this predictive intelligence area to understand what's going on. Now, if we divide the world into three big buckets, one is we know what we know, and sometimes we know what we don't know, but that larger bucket, that orange area that you see over there, is what you don't know, you don't know. Our focus today is going to be to how we look at that orange area and start to reduce it to move it into the green or that blue that you're looking at. That's a challenge that faces each one of us as business continuity professionals in trying to determine what we need to have in place for our organization. As we think about that, the way that that can be done is by following the predict, plan, perform methodology that we've talked about in other webinars. Now, the predict phase, where we're going to be talking mostly today, is understanding the vulnerabilities and threats, their impacts, how you monitor them, and what the triggers are that would activate your plans. Other webinars across the year will, again, return to the planning and the performing, but today we're really going to zero in on that, and we're going to hopefully give you a couple of new tools that you don't have today that could help you organize your thought process there. Now, by the way, our goal is always to know before now. Each one of us has a boss, and if your boss finds out something before you do, that's generally not a pleasant experience. I have joked in many of our webinars that the last time a surprise was good, I was 5, and it was my birthday. And so when you think about that, we're all challenged to know before that particular event escalates, before the problem comes, and that's our challenge that we're going to zero in today. So let's start to break this predict thing apart. Now, we talk a lot in the business continuity industry about an all hazards approach. You've seen FEMA and Homeland Security and all of the standards that are out in the marketplace using the term, quote, all hazards. Now, generally, it's not all hazards, and so that's a little bit of a misnomer here because there are other things to look at. We've got the hazards, that's the winter storms that could come through, the tornadoes that could occur, the flooding that could happen. It could be violence, as we are going to talk about next month in the exercise with the active shooter. But there are other types of vulnerabilities. We could have product recall. We could have communicable illness. We could have a brand and reputation attack. Turnover in a company could, in fact, be a risk associated with it. And we generally refer to those types of risk as business crisis risk. And we've shared some thoughts around that, and I'll give you a couple more today. But it's part of the way that business continuity within a firm starts to move up in the hierarchy. As we think about terms that you've heard about, enterprise risk management, and these become board-level concerns. A primary example is cyber breach. That's a driving concern at every board around the country. So also, when we're thinking about all hazards in any of these approaches, there are warning signs. And we're going to zero in on those warning signs. We're going to talk further about indicators, what could mean that this is about to happen, and then triggers. It's not enough to just have it. How bad does it have to be before we act, before we start our plan, and to have that reach that level? And I'm going to introduce the concept today of guarded, elevated, and severe. Now, you've heard us talk about that and using it in referring to communicable illness or behaviors of concern, but I would propose to you that that's a way to look at all of the hazards that you have, but it's a way to get your team organized, and I'll show you a new tool in just a few minutes that I think that you will find helpful. But when we go back and we start to think about the hazards and predicting, there are 5 common failures that we find in every disaster and crisis. And so far, these have held for over the last 10 years in the analysis of all of the crises that we've been involved with in helping clients. The largest single failure is failure to control critical supply chains. And that's certainly very true in manufacturing, but even in the service industry, you have suppliers there. And we're seeing in the cyber area that many of the breaches are originating within your supply chain and then coming over within the corporation. We saw that, for example, in the Target breach a number of years ago. And so that level of analysis of the exposure of your supply chain, their ability to respond, their business continuity or cyber breach response programs, is going to become increasingly critical to you within your business. The second greatest failure is the failure to train employees for working at home. Over 70% of employees across the country don't know what to do in a disaster or crisis, and 95% don't have a plan at home. Having a plan at home is a prerequisite to a plan at work because family trumps job, and they're going to be concerned about that. Our intention today is really on the third in that list, the failure to identify and monitor all threats and risk, and today we're going to really focus on that word monitor with the intelligence network to help give you some support. Fourth is failure to conduct exercises and update your plans if your plans are out of date. We just finished reviewing a bank, and the last time they had updated their plans was 8 years ago. The bank has gone through a series of large acquisitions and has more than quadrupled in size, and so their plans don't align at all to where they currently are. And last, the failure to do a crisis communications plan with pre-approved message maps within it. So those are areas to think about when you're looking at the vulnerabilities and threats within your organization, and as you sit with your team to focus on them. We solve those problems following the predict, plan, perform methodology, identify and involve the groups that you see on the screen, conduct the exercises, and establish how you're going to monitor and communicate. Our real emphasis today is on that concept of monitor and how we start to carry it forward. And I'm going to give you some different insights into intelligence, I think, also today. So when we think about it, how do you predict? How do you identify your organization's next crisis? And you see a lot of words there behind those that are listed. They're out there. I would encourage you to get your crisis management team together and sit down and start to make a list of what you're concerned about. Where are our exposures? What could go wrong here? Identifying those. And you start to see in some of those background words that you maybe have not thought about from a business continuity perspective. Defective products, low morale, social media, competition, intruding board members. So it's not just the fires and the floods and the tornadoes here. It's a completely different level that we're going to start to talk about. But it's one thing to identify the risk, but when do you know that it's about to happen? And that's really where we're going to focus our attention today. So the way you can identify your organization's next crisis is you need to build an intelligence network. So when we say that, can you really predict a crisis? And the answer is yes, overwhelmingly. But you have to know what the warning signs are for that particular risk and exposure about to occur. Because any lead that you can get, any opportunity to respond, for example, in workplace violence, would you rather respond before the gun comes to work, or would you rather wait until the gun is in your offices. So then we take those warning signs and we say, what's an indicator that that's in fact occurring? So if we can identify these indicators pre-crisis, we can see the crisis before it happens, before now, before your boss or someone in the company says, this is about to occur, or this has in fact occurred. And that, it makes a difference in outcome that is extremely strategic within your organization. Now, I mentioned business crisis risk, and I know we've explained this predictive model before, but just to go back, it's a way for you to start to organize your thoughts. That upper left-hand blue area is where we're thinking about natural disasters, the things that where business continuity has historically focused. And obviously there, it's an event, it's more targeted, and speed is quality and response of what you need to do and to focus. But if you look at the other three, difficult, chronic, and severe, these are more business crises that are occurring within the organization where they're not necessarily controls or business processes there, and if they're not addressed, they become systemic and ultimately fraud that would come in because there's not metrics and the system starts to deteriorate, and then finally it escalates up to a severe business crisis and financial institutions come in, regulators are involved, others would start to make a difference. So as you start to look at the warning signs and indicators there, there's another opportunity for you to be involved in the business. So when we think about this in any of these areas, look at the formula at the top. Information plus insight is equal to intelligence. It's one thing to have some information, but it's what you bring to the table in your role and responsibility for business continuity that makes the difference. That insight converts it into actionable intelligence. And that's where we want to focus as we go through the process. Now, always here, urgency is a function of, is it a crisis? Because you don't have any choice. You have to deal with it at that point. Is this compliance driven? Is it a fear of loss as you're thinking about it within your organization? Is this a brand or reputation area? Is there a cost savings opportunity for your firm, or is there a revenue opportunity? And so the business crisis risk that we talked about on the previous page, it could be something in your structure or a breakdown in your operational controls or your functional processes. That's another element that would come in and impact your business directly. And if we don't eliminate those, they're going to have an impact on people, profitability, brand, or reputation. What we're trying to do here is to elevate the role of business continuity so that it is more strategic within your organization in understanding those, and particularly to identify the impending risk before, in fact, they occur. Now, if we're going to talk about intelligence, we need different pieces of information at different times. And if you look at the 5 stages that are shown here in the stages of escalation, pre-action, onset, impact assessment, response and recovery, and post, every information level is different at this point, every intelligence level. Pre-action, that's the training, it's the vulnerability threat assessments that you're doing, the plans that you're creating, the training of those plans, and the testing, making sure that you have that information and is understood and is ready to be acted on by all parties. The event occurs. Well, how did you know that it happened? The quicker you understand that, the quicker your response can be, and the more that you can mitigate the impact. If we think about cyber breach, the average time from the time the breach occurred to discovery is 240 days. That means the bad guys have been inside your business for 8 months. Imagine the damage that they could do in that period of time. At onset, then our focus is life and safety. That's where your emergency plans come in play. The evacuate, the shelter in place, the lockdown, the lockout would occur. But we're doing an impact assessment immediately next, and you need information back and intelligence to make a decision. Is our location operational? Can we continue to function? What are the impacts on our people, our processes, and our procedures? And then if it's severe, we're going to be declaring a crisis, activating our crisis management structure, and then our individual departmental business continuity plans. As we talk about this, our coverage should be that there's an overarching business continuity program for the organization, and then there's a business continuity plan at each departmental level spread across these same 5 stages in order to restore the functionality of that department. And then afterwards, and after the company has not only responded but recovered, then in the post levels, then we're talking about the consequence management. What were the impacts? What did we do? What could we do better? What do we need to have in place? So across this whole spectrum, intelligence plays a critical role. That's great, but where do we start? We start with a vulnerability analysis, and that's something that you've been doing for a number of years in all likelihood, that you have created a hazard impact matrix. But I want you to think about the impact versus the certainty that that risk or threat or exposure that you've identified would occur. If it's low to medium impact, we're not going to really spend a lot of time on that because your normal operations will deal with it. So the good news is we don't need to invest time in exploring those items. But if you've identified that it's a potential medium to a high impact, now in that even low to medium certainty, that's a warning area, and you have to have contingency planning to deal with those. And clearly, if it's in that danger, high impact, high certainty, you've got to have a full set of programs in place to be able to address them. So looking at the warning signs and indicators in those warning and danger quadrants become a priority. So taking your team and sitting down and continuing that discussion will lead you to a way to begin to address those and to know earlier in the process. Now, there's a couple of new things on this page to you, and let's go through each of these introductions because this is going to be the backbone of what you need to be focused on. This concept here of a risk derivative. If this is happening, how do we know that's happening? And for example, you don't see fraud, but you see evidence of fraud. And so therefore, we need to look at what the risk derivative is for each one of the vulnerabilities and threats that are there. If we're having an attendance problem, that could be symptomatic of a communicable illness issue or some other area. Behaviors of concern, there are indicators there where someone who used to be on time now starts to be late. Someone who used to be easy to get along with becomes argumentative. Someone that's having trauma associated in their life could be a new threat. We responded to a crisis this last year where there was a suicide at work and the impact that that had on the organization and everyone that was involved. So we look at all of those areas. Social media in many cases will be the best way to measure those events. We set up a geofence around a distribution center for a Fortune 10 company, and we found an employee there who was having a problem with his boss, and the problem appeared to be racial. And finally, the individual in his postings out on social media stated that the only way to resolve this was with a gun, and that he was going to bring a gun to work tomorrow. Wouldn't you want to know that somebody's going to be bringing a gun to work tomorrow? Wouldn't that make a difference for you as you think about your plans? So if you look down at the bottom, that table that's there is a way to take what you created in your vulnerability analysis or your hazard impact matrix, listing the risk, and you can certainly list them in the order of the that you see the impact would be and the certainty, and then say, okay, for that risk, what's a warning sign that's starting to come? What's an indicator that that sign would be there? What tools and medium are we going to use? We can use weather forecasting for those things that are weather related. What's the trigger that would say we need to come into action associated with it? And then when are we at a guarded level? When are we at elevated? And then when are we at a severe level or a likelihood that this event would occur? Now you'll see the chart in the upper right-hand quadrant there in the grid, and the blue line is trying to be a kind of at a neutral level associated with it. And the risk line, the lighter rose colored that's going there in that curve, and obviously the curve for every risk is different, but in looking at it, maybe you're at a low level. We currently are not anywhere in the United States at risk of a hurricane, although I did notice that today they had the first tropical storm in the Atlantic was identified. It's out around the Azores, not going to be anywhere near to the U.S., but this is apparently only the 4th time in recorded history that they've had a named tropical storm this early. But as you look at that, Guarded is at that lower level. We're aware, we're kind of looking what's going on, we're understanding. As those risks start to escalate, as the concern level goes up, we then move to an elevated risk level. Maybe we're following closer. This person has indicated some particular issues that we need to be aware of. That's an area that we would think of it. We've seen a weather pattern that says, you know, there could be severe weather coming from those. So we move to an elevated level, do a level of preparedness. We're monitoring closer. We're making sure that we have our supplies and our material and our instructions all in place. And then finally we reach a severe level where this is at a point that we need to call to action. Most business continuity programs start and stop at the hazard impact matrix. They don't carry it forward to say, well, how do we monitor for each of the threats that we've identified? How do we create an intelligence network and then have predetermined action points where we escalate? So if you're looking at how do we take our existing program and move to the next level, this is what we're talking about. This is the area for you to focus in on today as we carry that forward. So as we think about these, and now we've got these, well, how do we become aware? How do we then start to activate? And they vary depending upon the risk and exposure. So I'm going to show you a couple of things that relate around activation matrix and getting the plan in the hands of your people at a level in a single piece of paper that they can do what they need to do. These are cyber breach indicators, and you've noticed here in this awareness type of indicator training, we looked at information assets and technology, we looked at brand and reputation, and we looked at user experience. So you start to see some things that could say, wait a minute, there's slow speed, or if we're getting frustrated, or we get the wrong data. All of those things could be indicators of a cyber breach. And wouldn't you want to know that early instead of late? So you can do a similar type of creation of the indicators around each one of the threats and risks that you've identified in your hazard impact matrix. Now, we convert these into activation matrix to get people moving and make sure the right groups are involved. Obviously, these are always customized to individual companies and exposures. And there are a variety of different approaches. The one on the left is an event activation matrix showing a minor event, an incident, and a business crisis. The minor event goes back down to that normal operations, and they're expecting their organization to function. But if it's a category 1, it's escalated up to this incident level as they've defined it, and they were concerned about data security, facility, human resources, operations, power, water, social media, and workplace violence. Then they had descriptors. Those are indicators that you would say who is activated. And they had a further level of concern. They wanted to know when they got their executive management team involved. And you could see that for any data security thing, they wanted them immediately notified. If you looked at a facility, if it was only damage to a facility versus serious damage causing a loss of use, then one area they wouldn't notify and the other that they would. And then finally in the category 2, the business crisis risk, those are ones that would automatically get escalated to the highest levels within the organization. But we're not limited to thinking about a large, complex organization. Something as simple as a church. You see a church service event activation matrix on the right. Is there an imminent weather event? Is there an imminent violence outside, imminent violence inside, but not in the sanctuary? Imminent physical threat in the building, collapse, fire, bomb threat, etc., medical emergency, imminent violence in the sanctuary, and then dividing that into action, message, user responsibilities, usher responsibilities, and there's crisis management. This was a large church, and their concern was what happens if something happened during a service. And as we have seen over the last several years with violence occurring at churches, we had the shootings in Charleston last year at a particular church. This is an area to think about there. So what we're taking then is the information out of the hazard matrix, putting it through the analysis of how do we create an intelligence network, what are the indicators, and then how do we convert those into actions. And hopefully you're seeing that progression coming up. Let me give you one more sample, and then we'll move on to the other areas. And I picked cyber breach to talk about because that's an area that probably most of you have not spent a great deal of time, and business continuity plays a critical role here, and I want you to have a seat at the table. In a business, a cyber breach is a business crisis. It is not an IT crisis. And that's an interesting mind shift here, because there's been a historical feeling, well, IT is going to handle it. But we have to be ready with response, because the response is the impact on the company, the brand, the reputation, your customers, and your employees. Again, we took those same three impact areas, information, assets, brand and reputation, and the user, looked at what's a level 1, a level 2, or a level 3. And you could think about guarded, elevated, and severe, as we were describing earlier, and indicating what needs to happen and how do we know that we're in those individual areas. So there are many different formats to create these activation matrix, but I wanted you to see how we're taking your hazard information, your vulnerability information, creating it into indicators, with then leading it into action. So there's a one-page summary that could, in fact, go into place. So how do we do all these things? Well, we do a process that we call listen and look, because you really want to know before these things escalate into the variety of areas. So what we're trying to do is to aggregate what's going on out there, and we look at streams and words and phrases, and it creates a general awareness level. What are your people talking about? What are we seeing that's concerned? Those are areas that are more general in background, and social media could well play that critical role for you, because when people know something, they talk, and where do people talk today? They talk on social media. We're just rolling out a program right now for a restaurant chain. It's a franchisor with 800 restaurants, and setting up a geofence for around every restaurant. And it's actually a neighborhood strategy. It's a mile radius of the restaurant. If you think about civil unrest, if there was going to be violence occurring, drug deals in the area, if there was a Black Lives Matter march or any type of an unrest around your property, wouldn't you want to know that? And so in doing so, we've been able to identify events and persons of interest. In one, we found threats on employees. In another, we found drug deals being done in the restaurant. So as we move from this general listening and awareness level, that's where we have these indicators, and then we move to triggers. If it gets to a certain level, what is it that we need to do? And that's when we look. And that's more investigative, where we're then looking at a particular person or a place of interest. I gave you the example earlier of the warehouse where the gentleman was thinking about bringing a gun to work to shoot his boss. So this is an evolution in our thought process in the business continuity field that we need to start to build into our plan of creating these intelligence networks to make a big difference in how we perform. I'm going to move through some quick ones just so you can start to see the warning leading through and going through the process. Here's a sign. Here's a report, and this was actually one that we uncovered last August. I'm going to kill someone at work today. Hey, if you are listening, pick this up, and wouldn't you want to know? And then we started to look at it. Knowing I have to go to work in the morning makes me want to kill myself. You have to take any threat or any accusation clearly at this point. And so is somebody just becoming frustrated? Are there other messages and images around this person? And this certainly isn't a brand that you want to have associated with your organization. So you have to set up a system so that when those warning signs or triggers come in, that it's then assigned to someone specifically to follow up, someone to address. And in this case, we assigned it to Susie. And then how do you know that? How do you track your progress to make sure that those things are not lost? So whether it's a vortex or a central repository of that information to track and use. So you've got to have a built-in set of escalation so that as these trip signs are hit, as the warning signs are there, that there's a workflow that makes sure that nothing falls through the crack. The information that we're finding is publicly available, And so the question will come back to you later, well, why didn't you know, and why didn't you do something? And as a general rule, as we all have said many times, if you're explaining, you're losing. So you've got to build that workflow into your monitoring to take the intelligence and the information, your insight, added to the information that's available to make sure that you're conducting that. So now we've got here, and we've now routed this over to a Karen Mazzullo to say this person is exhibiting behaviors of concern. Please look into this and as a further context and report back to me immediately. Now we're starting to see that what we're doing is taking the processes that you have in place and integrating them within the organization. Because really in a crisis, when events matter, seconds count. And so knowing this sooner, before that gun comes to work, before those types of events occur, becomes absolutely critical. Because we're faced with information all around us. Most of that information is just that, information. It's your insight, your direction, and your activation that converts that into action. And that's really where we need to focus. And it doesn't matter whether we're talking about, here we've given you violence examples, but if you're in a situation where there's some threat of severe weather, the same guarded, elevated, and severe approach works. And then the activation of your plans and the readiness of your people will make a difference. So what happens once the warning sign's triggered? And that's the whole activation protocol that we've talked about here. Do you know about it? Do your employees know? Have you reported it if it's a violence-related one to your security team? Is HR involved? How does that workflow process come? And if you go back and look at the pre-action, onset, impact assessment, response and recovery, and post, those 5 stages, the intelligence network is critical at each element along the way so that you know that those processes are there and testing them. Now, what else can we do as we think through this? You'll see here this person's database turned in the investigation over to the police, who turned it over to federal investigators, and led to the terrorist charges associated. There is information out there. You can pick it up and understand, and it should be integrated within what your plans are within your organization. So it's not enough to say, well, we did a hazard analysis, we did a vulnerability threat assessment, we have a beautiful manual over here sitting on the wall. How do we convert this into actions within our company? That's got to become the most critical aspect for us as we're building our plans and converting them into action. So our goal today is to talk about crisis or consequence. That crisis can happen quickly, but if you know about it in advance, we can mitigate the consequences for your organization, for your company, as we come together. So what are next steps? So if I were to ask you, do you want to know what's going to happen tomorrow? I think most of you would. Now, I would have liked to have known that I was going to win the lottery last night. Unfortunately, I failed at that. But at work, if you've identified these vulnerabilities and threats and they're about to happen, wouldn't you know it was going to happen? Wouldn't you want to know that it's going to happen tomorrow or this afternoon? You really can't afford not to. So I would encourage you to start thinking about adding this new dimension of intelligence to the planning that you've already done. That's a way to elevate your plans and to meet or and align to standards and best practices. So if you're focused in thought of is concerned about workplace violence or active shooter, you can do one of those with your team. In fact, as part of Firestorm's 10th anniversary program this year, by the way, we passed 10 years in existence. We're going to do 6 virtual exercises this year. And the February exercise, we did cyber breach last month. And so every other month we're going to be doing one. And by the way, we had 890 companies participate in the cyber breach exercise with their teams around conference tables going through and making those decisions. And we had over half of the Fortune 500. But the business workplace violence active shooter exercise will occur on February the 8th. And on February 18th, we're doing one geared towards schools. So I would encourage you to sign up for your company, or if you have others or others in the Eastern Great Lakes Association, you might want to remind them that that's coming up. Or where your children go to school, and make sure that the schools that are in your area get a chance to experience what it's like from that area. We want everybody to have the experience in a test environment as opposed to having to learn from a real event. Those exercises are at no cost, and they're held at 2 p.m. on each of those dates. It's Eastern time, and there will be 120 minutes. They're 2-hour exercises. The cyber breach that we did last month was a 90-minute exercise, and one of the requests we had was, could we give everyone a little more time as we go through the escalation. So please put that on your calendar and look for that opportunity. We'll also talk as a part of that further about this concept of the intelligence network. Make sure your plans align to standards and best practices. Begin designing your intelligence network now. Start small, add individual elements in it, and use this as a topic with your crisis management team to start to identify warning signs and indicators along the way. I would also encourage you to get an instant access tool. The days of having plans sit on binders on a shelf, that's not going to work today. Getting the emergency plan on a smart device in the hands of your employees makes a difference. Getting departmental plans so that the accounting department has their plan, and the manufacturing has theirs, and purchasing has theirs, all on their smartphone, makes a big difference. And I think that's this access, the instant access becomes the new standard to look for. And I would schedule some training and a chance to learn to see more about what you're doing. So those are next steps. We are going to have a brief associated with today's webinar. You can go to firestorm.com and download it, and we'll be talking about crisis and consequence management and sharing some more documentation about what you've heard about today. Thanks go out today to the Greater Rochester Chamber of Commerce for underwriting and supporting this Crisis Coach webinar series. This is the first session this year out of 12 that will be held, and the Eastern Great Lakes Association of Contingency Planners. We've done a lot of work with the group over the last several years, and look forward to future meetings and an opportunity to continue to work directly with you in that direction. I also would tell you that if you want to know more, you can go to firestorm.com and get a link to a recording of this webinar, or you can share it with others within your organization to see. If you've got questions, send them to us at webinars@firestorm.com, or you can pick up the phone and call us at 800-321-2219. We certainly look forward to speaking with you and sharing again, and we're glad that you're helping us celebrate our 10 years and encourage you to start to share this information within your organization. We all want to know that something's about to happen before it occurs. The concept of before now is a good rallying cry as we think about intelligence networks, warning signs, indicators, and then taking those and integrating them into an activation matrix so that everybody in your company becomes a part of and has ownership into the solutions that you're creating within your business continuity program. So I look forward to speaking with you again next month, and hopefully some of you will be joining us on the live exercise on the 8th. There's a lot to do, and I appreciate all that you do every day in your company to help make sure that your company is prepared and is safe. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful day, and again, apologies for you not winning the $1.6 billion last night. If one of you ever happens to win, I would appreciate an invitation to the party that would be held associated with it. So we all are facing today the reality of we didn't win, so we're back at work doing our job. Thank you all. I look forward to our conversation next month. Thanks, and have a great day. Goodbye.